Bienvenue, willkommen, and welcome to a brand new episode of Two Peas on a Pod. Today, we're diving deep into one of the most important and, let's be honest, overdue conversations in the charity world. What makes a great charity truly great at fundraising? And to help us answer that, we're joined by today's guest, Alan Clayton, author of the must-read book, Great Fundraising Organizations. Now, this isn't just another thought piece or set of opinions. Alan's work is grounded in hard data, an analysis of over 500 fundraising charities to understand what truly drives success and what quietly kills it. Now, we've all heard the usual suspects blamed for fundraising underperformance, or it's the economy, donor fatigue, or the if only our donors understood us better paradox. But what if the real problem isn't external? Alan's research shows that the biggest barrier to growth is actually inside charities. And it's not the strategy or structure, but fear. Fear of confronting the fundamental problems that are holding us back. Fear of risk. And most strikingly, fear of ego bruising, often from internal criticism received by colleagues at all levels of your organisation. Like when a new leader comes in and tosses out long-term plans, when brand and program teams override fundraising insights, or when the fashion bug hits your charity and the pressure to jump on the value exchange wagon or the rebrand becomes overwhelming. That's when growth stalls. So in this episode, Alan is breaking down what separates the high-performing charities from the rest. And we discuss how a truly great fundraiser has to understand that a charity is really two businesses with one mission. They've got to recognise that fundraising is emotional, and that's a strength, not a flaw. They've got to focus on long-term ambition, not just short-term KPIs, as the key to transformation. And they've got to know that leadership, not luck, is what really determines fundraising success. So if you're a CEO, a board member, a fundraiser, or anyone invested in the future of your charity's income and impact, this conversation is for you. And also at the end of the conversation, we'll be giving you a chance to win one of a dozen free copies of Great Fundraising Organizations. So stay tuned to the end for a chance to win your own signed and dedicated copy. Right, I think that's it for an intro. Let's kick off. Over to you, Giles.
Hello, Two Peas on a Pod viewers, and thank you to Mark. And now we come straight from Mark's kitchen to here in the studio, where here Mark is again.
Here I am, in a slightly different outfit.
And we have a special guest today, and that special guest is the book, Great Fundraising Organizations, spelled with a Z for the American market, and its illustrious author, Alan Clayton. Alan, thank you for being on. I haven't seen you for a long time, so welcome.
Thanks very much, Charles. Good to see you. Likewise, good to see you.
I've said this to you before. It seemed to me there are now two great fundraising books. One is Ken's Relationship Fundraising, which is all about the relationship between the fundraiser and the donor. And reading through this book, your book, which I think is the one that now sits along Ken's as one of the kind of great tomes of fundraising, this seems to be about the relationship between the fundraiser and their CEO and trustees, but also the relationship with the fundraiser themselves. Would that be a reasonable summation?
Yeah, absolutely. Whereas Ken's book is about the external, this is about the internal, how to build the organization that is fundraisable, that is capable of dramatically growing its money. So you're quite right. Relationship with the CEO and the board are critical, but there's a third element to that, which is a relationship to the rest of the organization that aren't in fundraising, the programs department or the services department or the advocacy department. Absolutely correct.
So what would be the three key messages that you would want fundraisers to take away from this? Or if you like, what would be the three reasons why a fundraiser should buy this book in order to get the answers to those questions?
Okay. Since sometime in the 1980s, people have been obsessed with marketing their organization and hoping that income will come when they market their organization. That's not the case. What we've discovered is that, what we've proven is that the Great Fundraising Organization is actually two businesses with one mission, one governance structure, one mission. One is the services business, which meets the needs of the service user, and the other one is the fundraising business, which meets the needs of the donor. This gives us a unique leadership challenge in fundraising organizations in that we have two separate businesses under one name, mission, and governance structure. Selling different, I'm going to use air quotes here, different products to two different markets. One cannot simply take the model of a group of businesses and apply it, because they are all providing solutions to their market, whereas fundraising is unique in that it sells a problem which its market, its donors can solve. So number one, it's a unique leadership challenge to lead a charity that includes fundraising function. People need to learn that. Can
I just interrupt you there? I don't think a lot of people who are watching this will quite get the idea of two businesses. So can you? So there's the business of providing services, the business of raising money. How do the two interconnect? Why are they two businesses rather than just one?
Well, they have different products. The services business is selling a solution and needs to be a credible business so that more service users will be attracted to it, so that it can recruit staff, so it can build relationships with scientific bodies and with governments. It's a slow-moving, logical business, rationally driven business that uses evidence, incremental improvement, and has a vast number of systems. I use the word bureaucracy in a non-critical way because it needs a bureaucracy. Otherwise, it will hurt people. You will recognize this from the necessary safeguarding of the NSPCC, Giles. And fundraising is an emotional transaction, first and foremost, with all of its donors. And it moves at pace because the emotions are fast, bluntly. It's as simple as that. And paradoxically, it sells the problem. Donors, first and foremost, need to solve a problem or there's nothing to do. So you have two businesses that are very different to each other. They sell different products to different markets. And one has to be like a public sector, academic, medical sector business, because it's carrying huge responsibility for people's well-being. And the other one needs to behave much more like a fast-growing private sector business, because it's dealing with one of the fastest transactions there is, which is the emotional needs of the donor.
So that's very clear. So how do the two businesses link, and who links them?
Well, they're obviously dependent on each other. And to some extent, not 100%, but to some extent, the services department provides fundraising with the information it needs to give to donors in order to have the product. They actually don't need to link very much to be effective. They only really need two things, which is respect, mutual respect that they are different businesses and the expertise in each business belongs in each business. And fundraising is not an expert in services and services are not an expert on fundraising. And just that level of professional respect. And the second is great communication. And the research is quite clear. That means sitting down together in real life and talking things through rather than having policies and emails to try and influence each other and such like. So in a nutshell, the CEO.
So we're still on your first point, we haven't gone on to your second, but just finally, so in which business does the fundraiser sit?
Fundraising.
Good. Okay, so your second point.
The second point is that fundraising is in the business of meeting a very basic human need, which is the need to give. It's a need that 99% of us have in order to have self-esteem. Or some people, will just need to contribute to their own family, their own local community, their own local church. Others to global causes such as combating climate change or injustice. But 99% of people need to give to some extent. And there's an emotional transaction there of need feeling, a thought process and reward feeling that fundraisers must be extremely good at meeting. That may sound obvious, but most organizations that have failed, we can see clearly that their view is all we need to do to serve fundraised income is be really good at meeting the needs of our service users. And we are really good at being a charity, so people should just give us money. That doesn't work. You need to be equally as good at meeting the needs of the donors. The Great Fundraising Organization does not see any conflict or competition between those two. Just be the best at both. Be the best at meeting the needs of the service users and of meeting the needs of the donors.
I've got a third point.
No,
That's fine. If not, I'll build on the second one.
Can I?
Yeah, of course.
Can I beg you for 4 points, Giles?
Oh, yeah, of course you can. Yes.
I think there are 4 that need to be made. The third one is well known to fundraisers, but it is that fundraising growth, the financials of fundraising growth, require multi-year thinking. Because we are trustees of, historically set up as trustees of wealthy philanthropists' cash a couple of hundred years ago. The whole structure is based around accounting for how the money was spent in the previous 12 months. Whereas actually what finance needs is to know how much is going out, how much is coming in over the next 5 to 10 years. And in the very best organizations, they actually have 2 parallel financial systems. One is the governance part, which accounts for the last 12 months very, very well. And the other part is the growth part, which is what's going to happen for the next 5, 7, 10 years and how can we influence that. And that multi-year view is shared across the organization by the CEO and by the board, which can create quite a cultural shift because governance is mandated by law, but growth, fulfilling one's mission is left to the choice of the trustees, basically. And point number 4 is the great fundraising organizations don't just accept, but they have wonderful respect for basic human emotion. I call this the crux. If you get past this, you can build the organization. The fundraising fundraising transaction is emotional. Most people work for no profits for an emotional reason in the first place. Yet professional training in most professions involves a huge chunk of how to take the emotion out of your work to the point where even mentioning the word emotion, never mind working in that space, can be deemed to be dangerous or unprofessional. Now, it probably is if you are a heart surgeon, but if you're a professional fundraiser, be able to work in that space is absolutely essential. So not expecting the whole organization to do it, not even expecting the whole organization to be comfortable with it. They will never be, but they need to respect it.
So how much important do you attach to discomfort, people being uncomfortable? I hope I know the answer to this question.
It's Mark will be familiar with this. We sometimes get feedback on creative treatments and say, I'm not comfortable with that. And I now reply quite bluntly, and I say, good, that's comfortable people don't do anything. That's the point. Emotions are uncomfortable until you act on them. That's what fundraising is for.
Thank you, Alan. As you can imagine, I want to come back later to the whole idea of ambition and aspiration. I need to hand over to Mark in a moment, but can I build on, I think, with your second point, which is about donors' needs. And there's a lovely section in your book on identifying versus changing needs. And you say a refrain that comes up in our masterclass series is, why can't we change our donors' needs? So and I love that. Can you expound on that a bit?
Okay, well, our emotional needs are based on, to some extent, natural selection. They've been passed down through hundreds of generations of human beings, but predominantly on our life experience. And that creates our emotional memory. And that's a combination of people who have influenced us and experiences that we have had. That guides our entire framework of what we need and what we believe to be the right and wrong thing to do. Our emotional memory of a lifetime. It is not connected to our logical memory. The two things are pretty much unaware of each other, which is why we often don't know why we're compelled to do something. Different seminar to explain that in detail. But these needs are laid down by hundreds and thousands of repetitions over and over and over and over and over again. This explains why some people respond to some communications and not to others, because they've got a different emotional memory. You cannot change the emotional memory by communicating with somebody's conscious brain, which is what every charity wishes they could do. Put out an advertising campaign on the values of the population change. No chance. It's not going to happen. No charity would ever have the budget to do either, because to change the emotional memory would take hundreds or thousands of repetitions. It's as simple as that. Our needs, as far as the fundraiser are concerned, are what they are. Our job is to identify them and meet better.
Absolutely. Thank you. Mark, over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Giles. I'm very interested. There's one point you talk about when you talk about growth. The idea between, I think you describe it as surging and flatlining. I can't remember the exact term. But obviously that's something that's very interesting to me. I've seen that happen in real life, many times. An organization is flying, and then suddenly, for whatever reason, suddenly things go off the rails. Now, in your book, you talk about surging is when the organization, I think, is more focused on the external, and flatlining is internal. Could you expand and perhaps give us a few examples? Obviously, you don't have to name names, but what's caused some organizations to flatline or perhaps even go into decline?
Personnel changes, Mark.
100%. 100%. And to imagine at what level those personnel changes happen.
The more senior, the more immediate the change.
Well, I might say junior ones can be, perhaps sometimes even more rapid.
When you get more junior people that get together in numbers and present their opinions as fact, if the leadership listen to that and they're the wrong opinions, then that can blindside an organization. And I have seen that happen. It is less common than a senior person changing.
But Joe, can I just interrupt in that one? If you look at the fundraising profession, which I've been involved in for a long time, when I started, fundraiser would last for 20 years in the organization. Now fundraisers turn over every 3 years. 3 years, move on, 3 years, move on. Is it possible for an organization where the fundraising team churn over every 3 years to have a great fundraising organization?
No. And it's 1.8 years now, according to our data.
1.8 years?
No.
That's shocking, isn't it?
It is shocking, but not surprising. It's an average. If you look at the great fundraising organizations, the ones that are succeeding in growing, so that, the biggest part of our study set and client set, they actually have a tenure that's 4 times longer than the rest.
Yeah.
So 6 to 8 years as average tenure of a fundraiser, which is easily enough to drive significant growth. So there's, I think, 1, 2, 3, 4, the 5th round of our research actually looked into this. There are some headlines in there about well-being and pressure, but you get those in any financially driven post. What really stands out goes right back to our first conversation about 2 businesses, 2 missions. The biggest reason for fundraisers moving on is poor relationships internally, either with leadership or with people from other departments within the organization. And that's the standout as the difference between fundraising and other sort of sales and marketing driven professions.
Because obviously when you talk to charities, particularly the very big ones, particularly the international ones, there's an awful lot of effort put into planning, producing, the typical 5-year plan.
Yeah.
But it seems that 5-year plan counts for nothing when there's a change in personnel.
Absolutely.
And why is the fact there is a plan that has cost a great deal of money, great deal of research, great deal of time and energy in putting into developing that, why is it so fragile? One person changing an organization could knock that plan completely out of whack.
Well, there's two parts, two answers to that question. So first one would be, why are charities obsessed with these 3-5-year plans? Well, in the services or program side of the organization, that's quite correct. because they will be used to receiving their money from something large and non-human, either a grant giver or the fundraising department. They will know within a reasonable margin how much they're going to have available to spend for the next 3 to 5 years. Their job is to spend it as efficiently and effectively as possible. Therefore, planning over that timescale is extremely valid. And therefore, if the culture of the organization is based around that, then the fundraising team will be expected to do the same overly detailed, overly analytical 5 and 7 year plans and be expected to deliver them to the penny. The fundraising world doesn't work like that because it's not a fixed income, fixed expenditure outfit. It's a variable expenditure, variable income outfit. It is susceptible to external factors. Is susceptible to opportunities as well as threats. Far more important, it's susceptible in great detail to the quality of its product and the internal behaviors of its team. So these plans, more often than not, don't survive first point of contact with the enemy. To a famous quote, they spend 3 years in writing a 5-year plan and it's in the bucket on Friday. Seen that plenty of times, and that can be a change in personnel. It can be a war. It can be a famine. It can be a change in the news cycle. It can be a similar organization doing very, 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 very well. But most commonly, I'm going to be really blunt about this. It's about someone internal to the organization ruining their own product. That's the most common cause of it.
Yeah, and one of the things that I talk about is that is the impact of fashion. The fundraising is really influenced by fashion. And if you get somebody coming in who wants to do something else, that thing happens, even if it doesn't fit in with the overarching plan. Because as an organization, a Blue Frog, we're working on plans, we take into account that we can't say exactly how much is coming in this year to the next year to the next year. But what we can do is we can focus on the audience, for example, that we are going to be approaching. And we can detail what are, Blue Frog, we use need states, as you highlighted, ours are slightly different, how we answer those need states. And we know that, if you're working with a new organization, for example, it's going to take 2 years probably to burn in an approach with those people who are donors, recognize you're treating them differently, and giving them the respect they deserve, and giving them the feedback they deserve. On the other side, it takes about 2 years for somebody to come in and screw up a good program, which might relate to your 1.8 years or whatever it is, and as a program. So when I was reading your book, but I think it was the guide dogs example, was the desire to focus on 180,000 people who were who weren't able to, live the life they wanted because of sight loss. Now, did that direction come from the chair of trustees, or was that the CEO?
Chair of trustees.
So the chair of trustees did that. And then on top of that, the program became, how are we going to raise the money? How are we going to do the work? So that is driving along the two channels that you've highlighted. Because often, what we find, and again, with a level of frustration, when you're dealing with a senior level of staff, it's almost like, if I don't tackle that problem, if I ignore that problem, I don't need to have it on my table. I don't need to worry about it, and I can just carry on the important stuff, which is not fundraising. And as long as we don't lose much money, I'm quite happy. Now, in terms of that, how do you excite people about the potential, about what they could do, the doubling or the tripling or the quadrupling of income, which obviously you've achieved with some of your clients?
Oh, absolutely. Okay, again, two-parter, because there's something in common to the 3 points you've identified. You've identified there: planning, fashion, and avoiding a direct truth about the scale of the problem to be solved. And that's something I'm now emphatic about, that ego is the enemy of fundraising. If people are more concerned about how they are perceived or the danger of them being criticized than they are about meeting the needs of the donor, the service user, ultimately fulfilling their mission, then fundraising will stall. Ego is the enemy. The solution to that is what Jim Collins identified as level 5 leadership, tremendous will and personal humility. Mark, you can tap Giles Pegram on the shoulder. right now.
Can't quite reach.
Yeah. But the absolutely ego is the enemy, and you can have ego, and in fact, fashion is driven by ego. Avoidance of risk taking is driven by ego. And actually a lot of planning is driven by ego. Just look at the number of fundraisers who've made a career. They were spending 2 years writing a strategic plan and moving from organization to organization without ever executing it. They shouldn't be nameless. We know who they are. So ego is the enemy. There to point number one, and I've talked so long, I've forgotten your second. What's your question? What was it? Remembered it, and I really do have to reply to it. Back to that point. Yeah. It was about how do you get people to engage with that great big problem? This is hard. People do not like to talk about the problem that they want to do, and there's a distinct process that we've now been able to put into a repeatable model, which is, first of all, you've got to accept that fundraising sells the problem. But you accept that fundraising sells the problem, you then need to identify and differentiate the problem from other organizations. You can get about 75% of the way there working in the logical space by going through various filters of what problem can we solve. You focus it, you get it down to a short list. But the magic always happens working in the emotional space. Storytelling, being unreasonable about the scale of the problem, and you do it and you work in the emotional space until the magic pops, and then you have to have the courage of spotting when the magic pops and stopping there and saying that's the problem we're trying to solve.
And you talk about that in your book in terms of happy endings and sad endings. And obviously there are many happy endings, but it's the sad ending that can cause that level of discomfort that's going to try and drive you, is more likely to drive you to give.
Absolutely. I'm not sure which example I cite in the book, but one we often talk about is RNLI, who for a number of years had a somewhat disappointing fundraising program. And during that period, the mandated messaging was how great we are, how brave we are, and how many people we saved this year, where actually it turns out the most important person in RNLI is the one they didn't manage to save. That's what drives the crew. That's what drives the staff. That's what drives the donors. So you can have 2,000 success stories. Well, that's just 2,000 reasons you don't need any money. One failure or one that you couldn't afford to service, that's the reason you need more money.
And that brings me to another problem that we face as fundraisers. When you talk about that an organization is saying we are great, it's almost sharing something from the commercial model. And I'm moving on to branding here. That most brands will say, we wash your shirt whiter, or we make you smell nicer, or your car will be safer. And it seems so many charities have borrowed that. And they've forgotten the fact that the donor has to be in that mix. And the message really for that donor means, is, a commercial brand say, you're better off with us. A charity brand has to say, we can't do without you.
You're absolutely right. Yeah. So one business of the charity, the service is saying, you have a problem, we have a solution. And fundraising is saying, we have a problem, you have a solution. Yeah, it's they're opposite messages. I got a bit fascinated by this. I'm not going to claim academic research to this, but I went through all the past files of fundraising communications I could find. And I'm now convinced of this truth. If you look at fundraising communications from the 1970s, 1960s, 1950s, 1880s, people intuitively knew this. Yeah, they were brilliant fundraising copywriters going right back to the founding of the RNLI, the founding of the NSPCC. Sometime in the 1980s, maybe charities just got big enough, but we started to look for management consultancy and leadership consultants. And because there was no such thing for fundraising organizations, we looked to the commercial sector. And they were all full of break down silos, integrate, one culture, one voice, one brand, one message. And it was for that import. And they completely missed two businesses, one mission. So we've spent, I don't know, 40 years trying to integrate two things that should be integrated. And the only way that you can instill some discipline is by saying, okay, brand is boss. We're going to take those two businesses and we're going to put somebody in charge of both of them that are going to dictate the messaging that both of them should use. And if you do that, you're going to compromise one or the other. And because it's criminally dangerous to compromise the programmatic messaging, what you do is you program the fundraising, you compromise the fundraising, so you have less money. It's a very, very simple solution. You say to your comms people or your brand people, purpose is boss, purpose is our brand. Just make your purpose your brand and bang it up there in big words. And then you have two different communications brief, one for the solution, one for the problem. Dead simple. But it's this sort of integrated, break down the silos, just miss that fundamental truth that we have two businesses that are the mirror image of each other, and trying to integrate those shouldn't be done.
When you said it was the 1980s, it was actually earlier than that. I'll trap this back.
Okay,
yeah. Do you remember the pregnant man, Sachi and Sachi?
Yep.
That was the ad that did it. That was the ad that did it. If you go back and you look into the annals of the Sachi's history, it was Sachi Kramer, I think, was the agency that became Sachi and Sachi. And when the pregnant man was posted, I've got a whole presentation on this. When that was first published, charities thought, look at this is amazing. And then if you look at ads pre that, and then you look at ads post that, and I'm talking about the big NGOs, the NSPCCs as well, and you look at the Oxfams, you look at the Christian Aid, you look at Save the Children, they go from these carefully crafted offers. We might talk, we can talk about organizations like the Salvation Army, the For God's Sake campaign, for example. But then we went after that and it went puntastic. It was all about puns. And I'll share a few little clips on the on this little section now, showing you a few of those old ads and how those ads changed. But you did, and I'm going to pass back to you in a second, Giles. But you had a working title for your book. I don't know if you want to share what that was, which was about branding, I think. Was that right? Oh, there was a chapter in it. Branding is...
It's another word beginning with a B. It wasn't for the book. It was for one of the pieces of research we did. It was our internal jargon for it.
So within that, what happens when a rebrand hits a charity? Does that disrupt? Does that help?
9 times out of 10, it disrupts.
In a bad way.
In a bad way. In that it takes the focus off fundraising and onto branding, and there are some pretty bad politics around that I've seen happen. Every now and then it is advantageous. But there's a distinct process, and it goes back to a comment I made quite quickly a few minutes ago, which is make purpose your brand. Purpose, problem, solution, ambition. If the purpose is clearly defined and differentiated, then it makes sense to redesign one's communication so whether we can clearly communicate that problem, solution, ambition, and the differentiation. But a really good rebrand based around purpose, not image, can have a massive energizing effect internally if done very, very well. So the best example we have is the children's hospices across Scotland, who in 2016 redefined their purpose as to keep the joy alive, even in the face of death. And on the back of that, really refreshed their communications to put the children and the families at the heart of it, simplify, make the communication clear. On that case, it was a benefit. Most rebrands I've seen are done not through a desire to be more precise, more differentiated, and more clear, but to try and educate people about the complexity of the organization, in which case you're actively damaging fundraising by doing so.
Yeah, and I think it's one of the experiences that we have as well, that once that new rebrand lands. And this is a concern for me if we're talking about needs, that people have a point of connection with that whole brand. They may love it, may have been around for years. Suddenly it changes. When we speak with donors, and I did a post on this earlier this week, and Amber, who's been a guest on here, pulled me up on it and said, I'm being too nice, when I was saying that sometimes those rebrands can make a donor feel alienated. And she pulled me up and said, it makes them angry. And there was a comment on this made by somebody who runs a telephone agency, and he said, we're at the pointy end of this. And when a rebrand happens, we really hear about it because they're calling those donors, and those donors don't understand, don't appreciate what's going on.
Absolutely.
Joe, back to you. Have another crack.
Yeah, I want to take it down a different thread. And you started. If you look at the book, there's a concept that runs throughout it like a stick of rock, and that's the whole concept of ambition and aspiration. So I just pick up on your thing about the magic popping. We now have the problem we're trying to solve. And what I was going to say is how much does it cost to solve the problem? But then you started talking about solution that leads to ambition. So can you expand on how much it costs to solve the problem?
First of all, could I tell a story about this, please?
Of course.
I'd like to bring you into the story, Giles. So we did the research in 2012, but my obsession with this actually started back in 2007 when we were researching for a pitch that my agency was doing at the time to a certain National Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children. And as we were researching for that pitch, I couldn't understand how you raised so much money. And I remember having a chart of children's charities. There are children's charities fundraising in the whole of the UK, and they were all bubbling along, most of them at relatively modest amounts, a few £1 million a year. Here was the NSPCC up at, I think at the time, approaching 200 million a year, because it was right towards the end of the pill. And we said, what on earth are they doing differently? What on earth are they doing differently? If you do a ruthless analysis, NSPCC should be smaller and some of the others should be bigger because their projects are more tangible and easier to describe and sell. So why is NSPCC head and shoulders? So I spent a lot of time on it. And I remember vividly writing it down on a pad I can no longer find. It's almost 20 years later. And I said, it's because they have a better product, full stop, and fundraising created it, exclamation mark. Yeah?
Yep.
Was the genesis. It was quite a number of years later when I got the story behind that. And I don't know if you remember, we were in we were in a rather nice hotel in London, halfway down our second bottle of rather nice white wine. And you told me the story about two things, which was how you identified the problem and then how you put a number beside the problem. And it was, part one was, what's the target for reducing child cruelty? Well, what you're doing by just even discussing that is saying, what's the right level of children that should be abused? What's the correct amount of child abuse that should be in society? So the only possible idea must be the end of cruelty to children, hence the full stop appeal. And I'll never forget your conversation about the number. I sort of, what was it? 500 million just seemed a bit too much. 100 million is what we spend on operas, and it's got to be more than that. So how about 250 million?
That was something that took me 1 minute in my mind. It was obvious. And we stuck with it.
Absolutely. And then I start to see that as a pattern. Yeah, of people just setting out the big idea, picking a number that they just feel is right, but a huge stretch. So that was actually the very first insight to it, was following you on that journey. And then when we did the first raft of research in 2012, it turns out that the other great fundraising organizations have done this too. There was no methodology for it. There was just some very, very good leaders through years of experience, trial and error, and strong intuition. They were doing the same thing. They were coming up with these big, very ambitious, emotionally driven ideas, defining them precisely, And then once they had the idea, they were putting a financial ambition on the organization to try and fulfill that idea. And they were doing it in that order, where the unsuccessful organizations were always starting with the money, trying to come up with feasibility studies, projections before they would agree their targets. And therefore they would never have the inspiration of the big idea or the alignment behind it. And that came out clearly. It's been an obsession of mine since, to figure out how you do that. And the answer to your specific question is, how much does it cost to solve a problem? The answer to that is generally more money than we'll ever have.
Absolutely.
Yes. The best ideas are impossible. And if you want to understand why this works for human beings, go and read Sapiens by Harari, I think he's called, the author, the book on the evolution of human society. We're kind of unique in liking to follow the rules of something that's either impossibly difficult or doesn't exist. It's a huge driver of human behavior at huge numbers. Second part to that question is, for almost every problem, there's more money than we can conceive of. Second is, how do you then put a target on an impossible dream and an impossibly large amount of money? The answer to that is, it's what excites your people most internally.
Mm.
What is the number that gets people truly fired up internally? I shall remain nameless. There's a charity here in Scotland has been a year onto this journey and doing extremely well. They did the first ever seminar when I saw a board spend 2 days residential with us, having the big idea and setting the financial ambition for 10 years, and then having a handover lunch with the fundraising and services team and saying, here's the big idea, here's the big number, you've got 2 days to figure out how to achieve it. It was one of the most inspiring things I've seen. And the board having to brief it live, face to face, was just amazing. On day 4 of that, it came to setting the financial target. They didn't say, how much is it going to need? How much do our services need? Do you know what they said? They said, how much did Chaz raise? Just, we want to be the biggest in Scotland. And so first target number 1 is, it's got to be a higher target than children's hospices across Scotland. And then I dropped one into the bombshell and I said, well, it seems to me that the most successful charities on planet Earth, they managed to achieve at the moment about £12 annual income from every man, woman and child of their population. So they did that calculation for Scotland and got a large number by Scottish standards. They said, right, that's our 20 years target. Let's take half of that for the next 10 years. And that was it. And what was then interesting was the chair of the board, the chief executive, were confident enough to say, right, that's our 10 and 20 year trajectory. We've got culture, we've got the product, the board can get the investment. And they gave that to services and said, develop your services plan on that trajectory.
If you go back to 1979, when I started at the NSPCC, we were broke. And I thought the only way of kickstarting this was to just organize a really big appeal. And back in 1979, the largest appeal there'd ever been was for 10 million. So I thought, okay, let's go for 12 million. And I remember talking to trustees, and the wonderful Countess Mountbatten of Burma, who was our vice chairman, said, Charles, that all sounds terribly exciting. Don't you think £12 million is a bit ambitious? You know, if we go for £12 million, we might only get £10 million. But on the other hand, if we went for £5 million target, we might overachieve it and get £6 million. I said, yes, Lady Mountbatten, I understand that, but which is better for children, a £10 million failure or a £6 million success? And in one day.
Quite rightly too. Mission driven. There you go.
You know, when you're discussing this, how are you introducing that thought into people's minds that, you know, so often you'll look at a budget, and I think you even talk about it in your book as being plus 5%. We go for that. We're vaguely track inflation as an approach, and if we do that, everyone's happy. Where does it come from, that level of insight? You know, at Blue Frog, we talk about headroom. We have a slightly different model. We see how much has been given in a specific sector, how much various different organizations get, and what we feel the potential is for you. But it's all about a headroom, which is normally 4 or 5 times bigger than what you're currently raising. Where does that come from in your conversations? Is it coming from you? Do you give people permission to think big? Or is it somebody coming to you saying, there is a massive problem, we've got to do something about it, a la the guide dog story?
It's a bit of both. I mean, the guide dog story didn't come out the blue. That was built up to over a period of time with what can only be described as an internal lobbying from the truly great Jane George at the time, and others. It unfolds in layers is the honest answer to that. Once people start to understand donor needs and the emotional nature of them, therefore two businesses, therefore multi-year thinking, it starts to open the minds. So people gain insight to the nature of the business over a period of time. It can be a day, but it's layer by layer. What always inspires the fundraisers is case studies. It's examples of how other people have done it. That's more inspiring than the data and the research every single time, because they're aware of these organizations and they can now see the analysis of how they did it. The next two are the two critical steps, which is the next is the CEO has to get it. They don't have to do the fundraising, but they've got to give the authority to the organization to be successful. And if the CEO gets it, so far it's succeeded 100% of the time when the CEO has got it. And that's down to the two businesses, one mission, and their critical role in liberating fundraising to achieve the ambition of the team. And then the final stage is the board. And there's two stages to that. The board, quite correctly, are generally, they love the big ideas as well, but they scrutinize the investment plans because that's their job. Once they understand their role and how they can oversee fundraising investment, they generally open up to the idea. So there's a kind of rational education stage. And then the icing on the cake is the emotional alignment and buy-in of everybody. And the question that we love to ask boards and individual board members in particular is, how would you like the world to be different when your tenure on this board comes to an end?
I think you earlier used the word risk averse, and about how trustees are more or less risk averse. And I remember when we were planning for the full stop appeal, on the one hand, we had a treasurer, John Aisbett, who was he was Goldman Sachs bank partner. He was really committed to ending cruelty to children and putting it all behind it. He wanted us to be risk driven. We shouldn't be risk averse. We should take risks in order to do the right thing for children. On the other hand, we had several trustees who were typical non-executive director types. They wanted to be risk averse. We shouldn't be taking too many risks. And I think the issue is, are the trustees really committed to the mission of the organization, in which case they're going to want to take risks to do the best for children? Or are they basically risk averse, concerned with governance and keeping a steady ship on the road?
Yeah, well, trustees, of course, have to do both. They're mandated by law to do good governance, and quite rightly too. And it's a choice of trustees to try and raise their game and try and put the organization out of business by fulfilling its mission. It's simply a matter of choice. I find through experience now that the word risk is somewhat misleading here.
Yes.
In the fundraising growth is not actually particularly risky.
No.
The most your exposure is a bit of notice period and any committed media campaigns, and that's it. Not really anything else. If it's not working, you can turn the tap off very, very quickly. The answer is actually education, understanding this. If you're saying we're investing 100,000 or 1 million or 10 million in fundraising, it's not all going out in one check. But also looking again at those timescales. So if we think it's committed for a 1, 3 or 5 year period because it's in the plan, then it looks like one big risk. So it's about having much more flexible oversight of the investment and the income, and more importantly, the lead performance indicators, the future indicating KPIs. And if the board and the services department and the finance department and the CEO and the fundraising director have a unified dashboard to look at the investment, then they can be greatly reassured. And if you actually look at the behavior of the most successful departments, what the fundraising team has is they have a 10-year ambition, a goal. And that doesn't change for that whole 10 years. Everything else changes regularly. Everything else changes very frequently. And I actually made a note about this. This is quarterly is best. Yeah. Every 90-day review of the risk of the performance. And then I read a book, I think it was called The Rockefeller Habits, about scaling a commercial enterprise. And they actually had a rule, which is 10-year goal, 90-day plans. And I said, okay, that applies to fundraising too. So it goes right back to the earlier question about the time scale of the planning. The goal setting is a decade, but the planning is actually only 90 days at a time. And then you have to react to what's happening internally and externally.
Let me jump 1 minute, because the idea of there not being risk in fundraising is profound, and you've covered it very fully in the book. If the biggest risk in fundraising is that you invest £100,000 and you only get £100,000 back, there's no risk in that at all. The only risk is of losing money. But most fundraising would say, oh, we couldn't invest 100,000 and only get 150,000 back. That would be unacceptable. Why? It's 50,000 pound profit.
Okay. This is the fundamental reason of why great fundraising does not happen in every organization. It's fear. We have nothing to fear but fear alone. And if you boil it down, it's fear of one thing. It's fear of criticism.
Oh.
It's fear of criticism by the media, by the public, or worst of all, fear of criticism by our own staff. That's the big risk. What happens if you spend 100,000 and only get 100,000 back? Somebody might criticize us. What's the fear about doing very powerful messaging? Somebody might criticize us.
I've never heard that before, and it's profound. Can you talk a bit more on just that subject? That this fear of criticism by the organisation's own staff,
that right
constrains what the charity can do for beneficiaries, is what you're saying.
That's the biggest block across the UK right now.
Yeah, I'm pushing on that point, but one of the things we're seeing at the moment is every week in third sector or civil society, another round of layoffs. Yeah, we're losing more staff. And the staff that are often being lost are program staff that are going. So that's the fear. The fear is surely we're not able to fund this work in a society that's getting increasingly problematic, increasingly out of control. And we know that that's a need state that donors want to respond to. As the world gets out of control, I want to gain more I can give to charity. But we've got, for some organisations, pouring millions into programs and shrinking year after year after year after year. How's that fit? Because surely, you've got, it's like frog in the pan of boiled water that, it's fine because we're only losing 5% a year. It's disastrous over, it's a reverse compound, really, that we're looking at.
It's a reverse compound, but what we're talking about here is about driving fundraising, not the entire organization. The vast majority of the layoffs are because of the changing statutory funding environment. The vast majority of them. There are some organizations with declining fundraising, and they're saying this is the economy, it's cost of living. Well, I say, what is RNLI's donors not having a cost of living crisis? Macular Society, Jazz, are they not having a cost of living crisis? They're all still growing. Yeah. Maybe it's the way you're doing your fundraising, but that happens to be the problem. And actually, if you talk about fear of criticism, one of the ones we see most is when there does need to be a decline in the overall size of the organization, predominantly due to the changing statutory environment. The staff come up and say, well, we can't be seen to invest in fundraising at the time we're having to cut programs. So we should cut fundraising by the same proportion, in which case you're just creating the interminable downward spiral of slow and painful death.
And how do you argue against that?
It's fear of criticism.
No, about that. How do you argue against 10% cuts across the board, including fundraising?
Well, if your money's declining from one source, you have to get more from another one.
Yeah, okay, but it seemed to me, I've had this discussion a lot, and it seems to me that all service expenditure, comms expenditure, finance expenditure, they're all cost centres. fundraising at a profit center, you do not cut your profit center at a time. It's David Ogilvy. When times are good, you should advertise. When times are bad, you must advertise. And a lot of charity CEOs just don't get that.
Yeah,
And it's 10% cuts across the board.
It's entirely logical to do so, and you can evidence the effectiveness of it in that scenario. And in fact, you can accelerate the effectiveness if you use the right messaging in that scenario. The reason they don't do it is because people on the senior level are scared of criticism from their own staff.
Is that a point we will have we?
I've got one
Yeah,
more.
okay. And then I'd like Alan to wrap up as well.
I just have one more point. It's just jumping back one section. When we were talking about working with trustees, every now and again you'll get a trustee coming in who will be ambitious.
Yep.
And they will come in and they will say, we've got to grow. I'm here for 3-5 years. It's going on my CV. I want success. And they will say, I've got mates in this and this agency. We need to spend £5 million on an advertising campaign. And they produce one ad. They put it out for a year or two. They get a bump of income because they're out there asking. And then we see that big dip. Is that something you're dealing with? People who don't understand the distinction between advertising and fundraising?
Well, by the time any of our clients on the Great Fundraising Program get to allocating their media spend, they've been through the education. So they only have the problem. But it's one that we see in the research. Absolutely. Time and time again. That goes back to fundraising is unique, 2 businesses, 1 mission. But it's a unique product and it sells the problem, not the solution. And I've already complimented Giles, so I may as well compliment you as well, Mark. The specialist fundraising agency is a specialist fundraising agency for a reason, and the one that's been doing it longest will be best. There's a reason, it's a long time since I met you in agency land. But we would occasionally see one of the big ad agencies in and try and buy market share of your agency and my agency. We got a bit complacent after a while because they never managed it for more than 6 months. Because there is a unique skill to selling a problem. And it's specialist, and it's specialist to fundraisers, and it's specialist to fundraising agencies. And for reasons we know but don't fully understand, it's entirely driven by direct response.
Mm.
Okay, let's wind up. Alan, in one sentence.
You can have more, Alan. You can have more than one sentence. Don't restrict him to
in as many sentences as you want. Why should someone buy this book? Why must they buy this book?
So that when you reach the later stages of your career, you can look back and say, I was in part something very important and worthwhile, and never mind how old I am, I'm going to be more ambitious next year.
That brilliant. Yeah, you rehearsed that. No, you had rehearsed it. Okay, I didn't tell you I was going to say it. That has to be the reason, doesn't it? When we're on our deathbed, when we look back on our lives, what have we achieved? Profit for shareholders? No. Making a difference to the world? Yeah. Okay, have you got any last word? Because I then want to come on to the commercial break.
I loved it, gentlemen. What a pleasure to discuss this topic with 2 people who understand.
Okay, so now the commercial break, all 3 of us, how can people get hold of the book?
You can go to our website, revolutionize.com, which will signpost you to all the major booksellers. A Google search for Great Fundraising Organizations will find it, but it's on Amazon if you're happy to use Amazon, or bookshop.com. If you prefer to support the small local person.
Okay. And then a question that Mark might want to cut out, because we haven't talked about this in advance, but we have done with our other guests, is that would you be prepared, Alan, to give up and indeed inscribe a copy of your book to one of our viewers?
Absolutely.
Mark, how do we choose the viewer that gets an inscribed copy of Alan's book?
I think it's as easy as possible. Obviously, one of the things that we want to do is we want to get the message out there. So, and we've done this a couple of times now. All you need to do is share the podcast, share this post, whether it's on LinkedIn or Substack or the blog. Just share it amongst your own personal network, and we will pull. Probably we'll have one that you'll sign and write a special personalized message, a bit like Ken did for us. But we'll chuck a few more in, and we'll pull out a handful, and you'll get a free copy. That's all you need to do is just share the post.
Yes. I'll tell you what, we'll fulfill that one. I'm gonna raise you. I will provide 10 inscribed copies, but there's just an additional 10. Well, this is for the first 10 fundraisers to get their CEO to request it.
Oh, wow.
Nice one. A nice one. Okay, so you've got it. Email to you, Alan, or do you want us to do it?
Do it by us. It's probably
It
easier.
should come through you as your podcast.
Okay, we'll do it. I'll set up a new email address. Alan's book at bluefroglondon.com. So if not, get your CEO to email Alan's book at bluefroglondon.com, and you'll get one of 10 copies, and it'll be sent direct to your CEO.
Okay, thanks, Alan. I'm afraid, viewer, I can't live up to that, but if I'm a consultant, I would love to work with you. If you think that my experience maybe have helped you, just get in touch. Google Child Program, there aren't many of us about. And Mark, do a little plug for you. You pay for all this stuff.
We do indeed. I'm Mark Phillips, Frog. And you'll see my stuff everywhere. If there's anything we can help you with, give us a shout. Big thing we're doing at the moment is more and more research. The way donors are changing attitudes about giving now is quite remarkable. And it's a fantastic time to raise money from a certain group of people who've got the available cash at the moment. You want to find more about that? In touch. Other than that, I think we're done.
We are.
And of course, Alan revolutionized. You got a new business as well, Alan. You just set up about well-being. We'll give that a quick plug.
Yeah, we've just launched Empower Mental Fitness. We've figured out over 3 years of research and trial and development how people can build their own well-being and resilience permanently through effectively training, and we've managed to gamify it so that it sticks with people. The reason for it is we know that the mental health statistics in the population are plummeting, and in young people they're apocalyptic. There's an awful lot of blame about what do employers need to do, what do the government need to do, and that's part of it. But the vast majority of people don't know what they need to do or what they can do. So we've solved that problem, and we've turned it into a for-purpose business. And there's actually a special product, a special service, particularly for fundraisers, given my career history, because there are some unique needs there, given that it's such an emotionally driven profession.
Fantastic. The address for that is now on the screen. So why not get in touch if that's an interest? Get in touch with Alan, and that's another fantastic way of helping. But I think aside from that, we're now done.
Yeah. Thank you, Alan. It's been one of the best hours of my life this year. It's been terrific. Thank you so much. And thank you for watching.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good one.
Thank you. And thanks also for watching, and happy fundraising.
Indeed.